in 2006-7, and because I'd had these discussions, I wasn't afraid to go and say hello to the chief exec, and say, what do you do? How do you work? And they were quite surprised to have, and at that time it was Stephen Moss, who was the chief exec here, and I started talking to them about how the organisation, how what was QMC then, and then ultimately NUH, would interact with junior doctors and what role they could play, and we put in a role called the Junior Doctors Liaison Coordinator, which was basically someone who was a go-to person for all of our junior doctors, just so that there was a link, not an HR link or a medical link, but just someone to coordinate the activity of the junior doctors, to get them on committees, to get them seeing how the organisation ran, and that junior doctor liaison role ran for about 3 or 4 years, and was massively successful in getting more people involved in this sort of stuff. And again, I'm in contact with all those people still, and they've all gone on from that small seed to do something within medical leadership. All of this was sort of all in parallel, as I said, to my clinical job, and I'm a bit unusual from a clinical perspective, in the fact that I after my SHO time I went into acute medicine, and acute medicine was completely brand new back in 2006, 2007, and so that was a bit of a leap of faith. And people say, well, why did you stay in Nottingham? And I was like, well, I was starting training in a brand new speciality that no one had tried and tested before, and to have at least one thing maintained in my life that was very vaguely familiar. Staying in Nottingham was what I did, but what that meant was that I was building on the relationships that I'd made as an SHO, and was building on that leadership stuff that I'd done. And I call it stuff because it is just it's an array. And during that time, I think probably I'm going a bit left and right here. I hope you don't mind. Yeah. During that time, BAM were putting together their Fit to Lead programme, and they were interested in whether you could apply Fit to Lead to junior doctors. And so Jenny said, look, do you want to just go through it? Do you want to do it? Do you want to do the programme? And it must have been about 2007, 2008. I went through Fit to Lead, and went through putting together the portfolio, assessing myself, and then being assessed against the various what I guess was the first iteration of the leadership framework, and I helped Jenny and the guys pull that together and work out whether you could apply it throughout a career, not just at to have a leadership framework that only works for clinical directors is a bit pointless, really, because you've got to be able to work your way up through it. And again, through that, I was on the group that put together the first leadership framework.
Was that the 2011 one when it was published?
Yeah, it was published, but the work was done like 2008, 2009.
Right.
And so again, it was really weird for me to be. It was very unusual. It was odd for a junior doctor to be on there, but I think it was good to be able to contribute to that. It was, and I think Peter Lees was involved in that.
Right.
And that's where Warwick started getting involved from a university perspective, and starting to put this together. And so, having dabbled in the medical management leadership stuff up to that point, and been through a leadership development process even before I was like halfway through my registrar time. I mean, that was just unheard of. It was unheard of, which was, and it was just great. I just loved it. And my clinical career was going well, so that was, and as I said, I do literally put them in almost the two boxes because they just carried on. Clinically, I started to get involved in sepsis, so severe infection, which, the word sepsis didn't even exist back in 2005. No one really knew what it was. And that got me involved in critical care, which then my clinical path went acute medicine, critical care, and I ended up coming out in 2011 with acute medicine, general medicine, and intensive care medicine, CCTs. So that put me in a really interesting position at the beginning of being a consultant in 2011, because acute medicine, you've got your foot in the front door. You see directly into the emergency department. You're dealing with and here in Nottingham, you're dealing with a massive and enormous acute medicine requirement. But if you bolt a critical care onto that, you then have visibility of surgery, of anaesthesia, of pretty much the rest of the hospital. And my first consultant role was across both campuses as well. So I probably had interaction with every single speciality. I had visibility of how the hospital worked. Intensive care can be a bit of an ivory tower from a medical perspective, but it's a great place to see everything. It's very. If you work in the emergency department, you don't see everyone. If you work in urology, you probably only see 2 or 3 specialities in a year. In intensive care, by definition, you are seeing everyone at some point. There'll be a gastro case, there'll be a hepatology case, there'll be an orthopedic case. You see everyone, so you get to know what's going on and have a chat with them in the coffee room and in the corridors about how their lives are. And the sepsis work at that time was developing, and I went to them, and the medical director at the time came to me because he was concerned about sepsis or our response to infection. There'd been a few incidents, and he said, "Look, can you just develop the work that you did as a trainee to see if we can get better at this?" And I started doing we created an audit feedback loop. I would audit a set of case notes to the sepsis guideline standards. And for every single one we did, we sent a note back to the individuals who were involved in that case saying, this is your case, this is when you saw them, this is what you did for them. Because we'd realised over the previous 2 or 3 years that you can go to a department and say, your department's giving antibiotics in less than an hour in 28% of cases, and everyone goes, oh yeah, that's very interesting. I don't care, because it's not my problem. Whereas if you say this was your patient, and on this day this is what you and your team achieves, that had an extraordinarily powerful effect on improving education around what the guidelines showed. And nationally, we were probably a couple of years ahead of all of the work around from. I don't know whether you know what's happened since then, but sepsis basically just exploded as a focus of sequins and of CQC interest, etc. And we were kind of ahead of the game on that because we'd already put together the audit processes. We had this audit feedback loop, and we'd shown success. We'd seen a massive improvement in like 25% to 75% compliance with guidelines in a year, and people started to look at me and go, oh, this is a guy who can get stuff done. And I attribute all of that to the fact that I'd done it before. This was going to BAM conferences in 2005, 6, 7. I was talking to Dr. Foster. I was understanding what governance was. I was understanding how you could use data to make a difference. And it just set me flying. Almost, within 6 months of me becoming a consultant, I was sitting in front of the medical director, suggesting a way to deal with this. And so that background was undoubtedly a springboard. And sepsis led on to failure to rescue, led on to recognising rescue issues, led on to developing electronic observations in the organisation. And to cut a relative, as we say, this is a relatively long story, but what happened then was sepsis led on to this IT development of putting everything onto a mobile device and doing OBS on a mobile, basic observations, pulse, blood pressure, temperature, and stuff on a mobile device. But that's now gone. We developed something called Nerve Center, and that then took me into, well, how do you document healthcare? How do you store that? How do you work with data analysts to get the data back out? How do you get the best out of that? We then moved into, okay, you've got you've got someone's observations and you've got their clinical information all on a mobile, but where is the patient? And